Stand by. Good morning. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and I'm part of an unprecedented cooperative group of elected officials from the towns, cities, and villages, the county legislative delegation, and the state assembly and state senate delegation that meet together under the umbrella of United Westchester. The organization, which was originally the brainchild of Assemblyman David Buchwald and now is ably carried forward by Assemblywoman Amy Paulin, came together in the aftermath of the 2018 weather crises that were known as the hurricane or the storms Riley and Quinn that caused such devastation and power outages in Westchester County. The aftermath of those storms created a group of people getting together from all across Westchester County to discuss what the problems were that were experienced in that storm and what possible solutions could be identified to make sure that we had a better relationship with the power utilities, Con Edison and NYSEG here in Westchester County, and the telecommunication organizations, Verizon and Altice, in order to provide the proper service during these crises for the residents of our towns, our cities, our villages, and our county at large. I'm joined today by a large group of elected officials. Some of them will be speaking in a second, but let me just mention them. I'll introduce them individually when it's a point for them to speak. The co-chair of United Westchester is Assemblywoman Amy Paulin. We're also joined by Assembly Member Sandy Galiff, Assembly Member Tom Abenanti, Assembly Member Steve Otis. And all of these individuals have served in other offices, both municipal and county, prior to their service in the state legislative delegation. We're joined as well by County Legislator Mary Jane Shimsky, who's the majority leader of the county legislature, Margaret Kunzio, who is the minority leader of the county legislature. And we also have with us mayors and supervisors, including Ivy Poole, the supervisor of the town of Newcastle, Kevin Hansen, the supervisor of the town of Pound Ridge, Warren Lucas, the supervisor of the town of North Salem, Tom Roach, the mayor of the city of White Plains. We have with us Josh Cohen, mayor of the city of Rye. We have Jonathan Lewis, who is a trustee in the village of Scarsdale, Jane Elkainiti, who's a deputy supervisor of the town of Mamaroneck, and other individuals from the various administrations at local levels and at the county level. This is an unprecedented gathering of individuals because the challenge of dealing with power outages in Westchester County is also unprecedented. And we saw most recently in the impacts of Hurricane Isaias, which occurred in August of 2020, that the same issues that were on the table in 2018 repeated again. The purpose of United Westchester being brought together is to look at the functioning of Con Edison, NYSEG, Altice, and Verizon, and not just to complain about things that are wrong, but to propose particular strategies that would work. And why this is particularly important is because it is the state government, New York State government, through the Public Service Commission, that has the ability to regulate and direct the work of various public utilities. So the work of Assemblywoman Amy Paulin and her assembly colleagues and members of the state Senate delegation become critical in taking the ideas that come out of United Westchester and turning them into changes in policy that will hopefully prevent the next Isaias or the next Riley or the next Quinn. With that, the report that you have, those members of the press and the public that are reading it, this document is a detailed document, multiple pages with analysis, and this is pulled together through the hard work of Assemblywoman Amy Paulin, who has taken over the leadership reins with this from Assemblyman David Buchwald. So I want to turn to my friend and colleague, Assemblywoman Amy Paulin, to take us through the process of how this report functions and where it might go. Assemblywoman Paulin.
Thank you so much, George, and to everyone here. This is a time unlike any in our history. New Yorkers in Westchester and everywhere are facing a global health pandemic, which has brought about extraordinary changes to our daily lives. People are working from home, students are learning from home. Tropical storm Isaias made a terrible time much, much worse. It was exacerbated by the poor response of our electric and telecommunication companies, with residents out of power and internet for prolonged periods. It is more critical than ever that we have reliable service during this time and always. The United Westchester Group, as was stated, was originally formed in 2018 after the aftermath of storms Riley and Quinn by my friends and colleagues, former Assembly member David Buchwald, and County Executive George Latimer. The group's efforts culminated in the release of a storm response report in March of 2018, which was used by the state legislature and the Public Service Commission to guide their review of the utilities. This year, in response to what was seen as continued failures in the aftermath of Tropical Storm Isaias in August of 2020, United Westchester reconvened to examine the failures of the county's electric utility and telecommunication companies in response to that storm. I was fortunate to co-chair that effort with our county executive. The executive committee was made up of mayors, town supervisors, board members of municipal governments, county legislators, and 5 state assembly members, all who represent Westchester. This year's report has 42 recommendations and covers a summary of responses included in feedback questionnaires that were filled out by Westchester government officials in the weeks after the storm. In addition to the information that was collected through these surveys, United Westchester's executive committee members formed 7 subcommittees to examine in detail the performance of Con Edison, the performance of NYSEG, the performance of the telecommunication companies, Altice and Verizon, the crew management practices of the electric utility companies, the use of weather forecasting by the electric utility companies, storm hardening and system resiliency strategies, and the relationship of emergency services between the county and municipal governments. These 7 subcommittees held multiple meetings. They worked very hard. They discussed these topics at length and met with relevant individuals to understand further the activities of those entities involved in storm response efforts in Westchester County, which has had a disproportionate number of outages and a disproportionate length of time of restoration. In identifying problems that need to be addressed, it is our hope that solutions will be developed, whether by these companies or, if not, by government intervention. I will now turn this back over to our county executive, who will in turn introduce the respective co-chairs. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amy. And the work that each of these different subcommittees did were the key component pieces of what this report is. So we're going to begin first with comments by Ivy Poole, who's a supervisor of the town of Newcastle, the hamlets of Chappaqua and Millwood, part of that jurisdiction, and Jane L. Kainini, who's deputy supervisor of the town of Mamaroneck, within the villages that include the villages of Larchmont and a portion of the village of Mamaroneck. So they represent both a southern Westchester and a northern Westchester community, and they both tackled the area of the Con Edison subcommittee area of responsibility. So Madam Supervisor Ivy Poole, followed by Madam Deputy Supervisor Jane Eden.
Thank you, County Executive Latimer and Assemblywoman Paulin. It's been a pleasure to serve on United Westchester with you. And on behalf of the residents of the town of Newcastle, where I serve as town supervisor, we are grateful for your leadership and your urgency in addressing these critical issues. As the co-chair of the Con Ed subcommittee, I am proud of the recommendations in our final report, and I urge Con Edison and the Public Service Commission to thoroughly review the numerous detailed recommendations that are in the report. 2 of the highlights include, first, Con Edison must provide more accurate and timely information to local governments and should consider implementing a municipal portal for damage assessment and 2-way communication, as well as improvements to the municipal liaison program and its intergovernmental conference calls. Second, Con Edison should review and improve monitoring and maintenance of service for individuals on life support or otherwise dependent upon electricity to meet their critical medical needs. Local governments stand ready to work with you, Con Edison, to update and maintain your critical customer lists. Now I'll turn to my co-chair, Jane L. Kainini from the town of Mamaroneck, who will highlight 2 additional areas.
Thank you, Ivy. I want to echo your words of gratitude regarding the leadership of our county executive and Assemblywoman Paulin. In addition, I would like to thank the staff members from the Assemblywoman's office who provided so much support to our subcommittee's efforts. 2 additional recommendations include, first, Con Ed must provide accurate information when communicating via text, website, or phone communication to customers regarding status, response, and restoration of services. Second, electrical utility companies should acquire and distribute sufficient dry ice to meet demand. To facilitate distribution, the electric utility company should be prepared to have more distribution centers, to rotate locations, and to provide notice of locations farther in advance. As mentioned earlier, there are many more detailed recommendations in the final report, including the need for utilities to be held to time restoration targets. On behalf of the residents of the town of Mamaroneck, I am pleased that we have taken a hard look at the response of Con Ed to Tropical Storm Isaias, and I'm hopeful that the recommendations we make today will result in real substantive changes for the people of Westchester County. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Ivy. They had responsibility for the Con Edison subcommittee. Con Edison serves somewhere between 80 to 90% of the customers in Westchester County, but along the northern tier and the northeastern corner of Westchester County, it's NYSEG, N-Y-S-E-G, that provides the services. And so the subcommittee to look at NYSEG functioning was headed by Town Supervisor Kevin Hansen from the town of Poundridge. Kevin?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, George. And again, I also want to say thank you to Amy and everybody else who participated in this. Having been one of the participants in the study 2 years ago with Tropical Storm Quinn and Riley, I can tell you the recommendations that we laid out specifically for NYSEG had the same message on it that says, we're your municipal partners here. We're your partners to try to make sure that we can get restorations done as quick as possible. And we laid out a whole series of recommendations. And from our perspective in this last storm, we were relatively pleased that in that 2 years, NYSEG took our recommendations and started to applying them. And so as a result, they did a very good job in terms of helping us become partners in terms of restoration and communications. And as you know, communications is the key to all this. We in the Northern Westchester group here, for NYSEG, we are the end of the electrical grid. And this is an old aging infrastructure that we have to deal with here. And the reality is we have the foliage, the trees that are much higher than they ever were before. So this struggle is going to be an ongoing, continuous struggle that we have here when we have an old infrastructure, old poles, old wires that definitely need more hardening. So our recommendations continue down the same line. This is the time that we need to get to the point where we're going to have the smart meters that allow us to really be able to tell and communicate directly with the residents in terms of how we're doing, where the electricity is out. They've become accustomed and they're surprised every time I talk to them when our residents up here don't really understand that NYSEG doesn't know that they don't have power. They just don't know. The grid is just not smart enough to do so. So that's where we need to get to. We need to continue to invest in the vegetation management up here. We need to continue to invest in the hardening of the utility lines up here and continue to work as partners again with figuring out the right resolutions and restoration times. So in the big picture here, we're very happy with this report because this report showed that utility companies, if they take it seriously, something good can happen. And I just wish that the same thing would happen, that the other utility companies would take notice of this report and take action with it, and particularly the telecommunications companies. That's
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much, Kevin. We're going to be talking about the telecommunication companies in a second, but just to show the alpha and the omega, Westchester County has both very rural areas, such as the one that Kevin represents, very congested urban areas such as New Rochelle, White Plains, Yonkers, and Mount Vernon, and then also more the classic suburban areas that Newcastle and others would represent. And so service delivery in each of those areas have different challenges. And of course, that is the challenge that each of us have as elected officials to try to figure out how to deal with the localized problems in our own areas so that power can be delivered through these kinds of incidents and to go forward. I'm next going to call on Assemblyman David Buchwald. David has just completed 8 years of service as a New York State Assemblyman. It followed his tenure as a White Plains Common Councilman. So he's had both the city and the state experience. And aside from being in many ways the father of United Westchester, his original idea for us to work together in harmony on this, he's also taken on the issue of weather forecasting and how that fits into the recommendations that would go forward. So without any further interruption, Assemblyman, we keep the title forever, David. Assemblyman David Buckler.
Thank you. Thank you very much, County Executive Latimer, and to you and Paul and my former colleague in the Assembly. Been, on some level, very proud that United Westchester's continued the work that we started in 2018. I'm of course disappointed that we had to do that so quickly in 2020 because of Tropical Storm Isaias and the response of utility companies to that storm and what Westchester residents and businesses had to experience. But whether it's Con Ed, as we heard from earlier, NYSEG is Supervisor Hanson relayed, even with improvements, still work to be done, or Telecommunications as Supervisor Warren Lucas will relay to us shortly. All of the responses of utility companies in part rest upon having accurate weather forecasts. And though we had touched on weather forecasting in our 2018 report, we decided to make in our 2020 report weather forecasting its own category of analysis and recommendations. I was pleased to co-chair that effort with Jonathan Lewis, and who's a trustee in Scarsdale. And we basically lay out in our section of the report where forecasts differed and where they were accurate or inaccurate. And fundamentally, you cannot have a proper response without an accurate forecast. But on the other hand, you cannot just make your forecast the sole determination of how you're going to prepare for a storm, because inherently, of course, weather is unpredictable. So we lay out a series of recommendations. One of them is to the Public Service Commission in New York State itself to do an audit of the forecasting systems used by utilities. I should say, although we have a lot of information from Con Ed and NYSEG to analyze, telecommunications companies didn't reveal much information at all about whether they do any forecasting or rely on any forecasting for their decisions. But we do, of course, have 3 recommendations for the electrical utilities that are the first to respond to these things. One of them is to analyze the forecasting data they have to determine its accuracy, compare it to the gold standard, which we believe is the National Weather Service, and to make public annually their process for analyzing their weather forecasts and to benchmark them against the other forecasts that are available. We fundamentally believe that as storms are coming, that weather information should be provided to Westchester leaders and Westchester's Emergency Operations Center. Not just in a summary form, because as we saw, even though those summaries were sometimes provided, they were either different from what you could have gotten elsewhere, or it could have been something that with more detail, local governments could have prepared for what ended up being a very significant storm. And we believe that a lot more attention needs to be paid to these forecasts and recognizing their limitations. Frankly, one of the reasons that NYSEG seems to have done better is they recognized that they couldn't make operational decisions just based on what forecasting information they had. They prepared for more of a worst case scenario, and ultimately when that arrived, their responses seem to be more on the ball. And so we hope that utility companies and members of the public and the Public Service Commission will look at our report. It's now, I believe, 96 pages. Last time around was 48 pages. Hopefully, whenever this next occurs, and it'll be many years from now, hopefully when all of us are out of office, but I recognize that there's great effort here at United Westchester to make sure that we are prepared as much as possible. I want to credit all the members of the Executive Committee and the entire organization for being dedicated to making sure that we are doing everything we can to keep utility companies to account. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And again, thank you for your vision in originally getting this whole process off the ground 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, and you deserve the lion's share of the credit for that. So we've talked a bit about the 2 utility companies, NYSEG and Con Edison, and we've touched on the weather forecasting component. Jonathan Lewis, when he speaks in a few minutes, will touch on that again. Now I want to turn to the issue of telecommunications, and perhaps in the most recent hurricane, Isaias, the issue of the telecommunications operations became much more prominent in the way we looked at things. And in the northeastern corner of our county, in as probably as rural environment as we have, is the town of North Salem. They were affected very dramatically by the loss of telecommunication services. So the very able town supervisor of that community, who has a background in corporate life as an IBMer, Warren Lucas, took on the responsibility of taking a look at the telecommunications in that subcommittee. Warren?
George, thank you very much. I was surprised, actually. You did say that we were very rural up here, but when we got together and met, we had the same problems from Yonkers all the way up to the northern part of the county. And there's really a couple of different companies that are out there. The city of Mount Vernon has Spectrum. There's a small part of Somers also that has a Comcast Xfinity. And we do have Verizon throughout the county. Some places offer Fios. There are parts of the county that Altice, also known as Optimum or Cablevision, that's the only in town. In fact, they cover the entire county. And our focus was, I think, to a great extent on Altice, although there is other requirements in there for Verizon and such. You can't look at anything, a TV show talking about the economy, without hearing that this COVID pandemic has really pushed the online economy further in 1 year than they anticipated, really over a 5-year, 10-year period. And that comes down to, kids taking school from home, people working from home, people ordering everything, from home, and that requires a robust telecommunications network. And when we look back on the work that really Altice has done, they took over from Cablevision in 2016. And the report that they met with the Public Service Commission in 2016, and the report that the Public Service Commission gave them, they're saying, these are the things that we want to see you do. And a lot of those things still need to be done. The report covers about 11 recommendations, but there are a couple, I think, that really are kind of critical. At their own admission, when the electric power came back up, 40% of Altice's customers were powered back up without anything on their behalf, just simply because the electrical came back up. One of the requirements in 2016 from the Public Service Commission was that they power the nodes. And they do with batteries, but they last about 4 hours. So that's one of the things that we focused on here. There's also fiber to the home program that was discussed with them in 2016, and network topology and all these other wonderful things. The last mile really to everybody in the county is copper. The copper's been out there for 20 or more years. It's oxidized. It causes problems all the time. That's something that they have to look at, and we've asked them to look at. There are things that impact us on a regular basis, although during storms greatly. They need more technical support out in the field, and also customer support. Their customer support is woefully lacking. If you try to get them on the phone, you have problems, and that's really true of any of the telecommunications, unless you want to pay a bill, in which case you get to somebody pretty fast. We talked about other things such as credit and how that's applied back to customers when they lose power, about in the municipalities cleaning up the telecommunication lines and wires that are left all over the place. But in general, I think the 11 items, the 11 recommendations that were covered are pretty robust. They'll deal with 80–90% of the problems that I think that we're having right now with Altice and Cablevision, and to a certain extent Verizon. I do want to thank, again, like everybody else, Assemblyman Buckwalt and Assemblywoman Paulin's focus on this, and their staff's support and help. Anytime we all come together as a group, Albany listens. And so from that point, I just want to thank them very, very much.
Thank you very much, Warren. And we should also recognize, before we go on to our next speaker, that we do have with us on this Lisa Urban, who is a staffer for Assemblyman Steve Otis. We have Michelle Sterling, who is a staffer with Assemblywoman Amy Paulin. And we have Alyssa Jacobs, who is a staffer with the New York State Assembly, all of whom are critical in this process. And we thank their involvement along with the Assembly members that they work with. And I also want to point out that Susan Spear is with us. She is now the Deputy Commissioner for Westchester County's Department of Emergency Services. Much of this time frame, she worked here as an assistant deputy director to operations, number 3 person in operations, and now as a deputy commissioner in emergency services. Susan has been very critical for our team in working on these issues. Ellen Hendricks is also with us. She's our assistant director of intergovernmental affairs. And so she's worked closely with all of our different municipal people. And we have our communications team here, Catherine Chaffee, our director, Joe Scamato, and Emily Lavin also is part of it. So we want to thank the people that help all of us as elected officials pull together these things. So from North Salem, we now want to go to the city of White Plains, our home city here in an urban part of the county. Mayor Tom Roach has taken on the responsibility of discussing storm hardening and what could be done to make the system more resilient to future storms. And Tom, who has served as a council member before becoming mayor, a lawyer by profession, and has done a terrific job running this urban center in Westchester County, has some very clear recommendations in this area as well. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, County Executive, and I want to thank all my colleagues for their hard work on this. It's funny, we're going almost last in the lineup, but what we were focused on are the things that come first: the system resiliency and storm hardening, better prepared infrastructure for the storm so that the outages are lowered, the number of people who are out of lights comes down before the storm, so that the resources we do have can be applied more effectively and quickly. We recommend that the Public Service Commission require electric utility companies to submit storm hardening and system resiliency plans for a 10-year period. Those plans should include, but not be limited to, management of vegetation, that's tree trimming, and also selective tree removal, which is a program that was started not too long ago by Con Ed. Improvements to system management practices, replacement of obsolete cables, wires, and poles, use of aerial cable where possible, automation and circuit reconfiguration, selective undergrounding with a particular focus on high-capacity feeders with a history of disruption that are in proximity to current underground service. So one of the conclusions we reached here is that progress has been made in the area of system management in terms of the switches and other pieces of equipment that have been put in to try and isolate outages and separate them from the grid as a whole to reduce numbers that way. But that will be an ongoing thing that's going to happen. But we also realize that it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Undergrounding is very expensive. The use of aerial cable is really not something you can do in a densely populated area because of the nature. It's a more insulated cable, so it actually can have a bigger impact and more effective use in the more rural parts of the county. Whereas undergrounding, if you underground a block, it's only as good as the power coming in from each side. So we've got a lot of work to do. I want to thank everyone for helping out with it, and we look forward to working together in the years to come and to see that these actual improvements get done.
Thanks very much, Tom. And this report, which includes recommendations for the power utilities and for the telecommunication companies, also has recommendations for the county government, which fall within the executive administrative branch. The report is being submitted, of course, to the Board of Legislators. So both Legislators Shimsky and Kunzio will review it in the respective committees. Those areas of recommendation for the county government under my direction will be implemented. But the point being is there's something that all of us can do better. And the county certainly takes that responsibility, as well as those other entities in the game that are part of it. And we include both the legislative and the executive branches as we review it. Jonathan Lewis is with us. He's a trustee in the village of Scarsdale. He served on the weather forecasting subcommittee as a co-chair, but he chaired the emergency services subcommittee. So do a little double duty. Jonathan, do you want to reference the things that your subcommittee reviewed?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you to our County Executive, George Latimer, and Assembly Person, Amy Poland, for the leadership on this effort. I also want to say it was an honor and a pleasure to serve as co-chair with Assembly Person Buchwald on our subcommittee on weather. I'm now going to discuss county emergency management. The conclusion from our survey of county municipalities is that the Westchester County Office of Emergency Management, OEM, and County Emergency Operations Center, EOC, are highly regarded. 25 municipalities participated in the survey, and the consensus is that they feel well served and well supported by OEM and EOC. The survey revealed there is demand for OEM and EOC to play a greater role in helping the county prepare for, manage, and respond to events, disasters, and storms. To that end, there is overwhelming support from municipalities for the county to lead and coordinate the development of a county-wide comprehensive emergency management plan. Of the 25 municipalities that responded to the United Westchester questionnaire, 24 support the creation of a comprehensive emergency management plan. We have 4 recommendations to consider in the development of a new plan. 1, there's broad support for OEM to lead additional planning and training activities throughout the year in preparation for storms and emergencies. This would support the development of shared skills and knowledge to improve coordination. 2, there is widespread interest among municipalities for OEM to play a larger role in the procurement and distribution of resources needed to respond and recover from disasters. 3, there is interest in creating a common web-based incident management system to facilitate responsiveness and resilience. This would improve collaboration as well. There are divergent views on this subject, but support is sufficiently broad-based to merit exploration of this topic. 4, the county should consider putting in place standard protocols to facilitate coordination in response to emergency events. This includes creating shared definitions of when municipalities should activate their emergency operation centers and whether EOCs should be fully or partially activated. Coordination should be given, rather consideration should be given to whether municipalities should have a single point of contact for emergency management or otherwise. Our survey revealed municipalities used divergent approaches for this event. All of these recommendations reflect the spirit of United Westchester, collaborating across the county to reduce risk, improve outcomes and resiliencies after emergency events. Our goal, strengthening our emergency capabilities to save lives. Thank you all for your time and the work of the committee.
Thank you, Jonathan. And as I said at the outset, those recommendations which do direct to the county have been well received by those of us in the county. There's work we can do. Having asked Susan Spear to move over to serve as a deputy commissioner, I'll lay these all on her desk. One of the advantages of being an executive, give the work to somebody else to implement. But we intend to fulfill, Jonathan, the things that you've laid out, and the supervision of the Board of Legislators as they provide legislative oversight of the executive branch will continue on this and a number of other areas. Before I make a couple of closing comments and we go to close, we have no questions from the press that have been received, but all of the people that you see speaking today are available to any members of the press on any individual questions or areas about the report in general or about the specific areas. But Amy, I want to give you a chance for some closing comments, and I'll make some closing comments, and then we'll head on to whatever our next stop is for the day. Assemblywoman Paulin.
Sure. I just want to point out that we had so much participation from local government officials. You know, we have all of our assembly members who participated on the Zoom right now. So I really appreciate all of their help. They have lived through all of the storms since Sandy. And we really need to step back and evaluate together with telecommunication companies, with our electric utilities, why is Westchester, why does it take so long here? You know, it's uncommon, and the rest of the state just doesn't see those prolonged outages. And so I really just want to say this is going to be a continued effort. We are going to be monitoring our recommendations. We are going to be working to the extent that Con Edison, NYSEG, and Altice and Verizon are willing. We want to work together to get them all done. And I just, you know, again, want to thank everyone. It's been a bipartisan effort. And, you know, we have the leaders of the county board. We have the leaders on the corporations committee. We have the leaders in the county. And we had enormous smarts and expertise. And we're just going to continue this work. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Amy. And I just want to recognize one more time that with us on this call, we have Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff, we have Assemblyman Steve Otis, we have Assemblyman Tom Abenanti, all of whom are leaders in the State Assembly on these issues and other issues, and some of their staff members are here. Our county legislators, Majority Leader Mary Jane Shimsky and Minority Leader Margaret Kunzio. And we also have the mayor of my home community, Rise City, although that looks like a Golden Gate Bridge in his background, Mayor Josh Cohn of the city of Rye, all of whom have participated not just in the Zoom, but in the development of the issues and the policies that are available. I just want to close the general comments here. We have no questions from the press to handle at this point. But let me just say that more generically, beyond the level of United Westchester's scope of dealing with power outages, this is government the way it should be. This is government that deals with different levels of government. You're seeing municipal, county, and state officials working together. You're seeing a bipartisanship where your political party affiliation is not the relevant issue here. We're dealing with people who have found that aside from their normal responsibilities, every day running a town, running a village, running a city, having state legislative or county legislative issues in front of them, running a county government, that we find time to work together to try to address a problem. When these crises come up, when the next storm comes up, the average individual only wants to know, when is my power going to be back on? When am I going to be able to use the internet? When am I going to be able to make telephone calls? And they don't necessarily want to hear all of this dry type of backdrop, but it's this dry backdrop, these recommendations that have been crafted together by these people that you see on the Zoom call and many others that work through what are the significant things that we need to have happen. I made a proposal that's been part of the report that we need to create a reserve corps of individuals who can be trained, who in an emergency mode can assist the major utilities in restoration services. And we can find that corps just as we do with auxiliary police and volunteer firefighters. It wouldn't be voluntary, there'd be a paid structure to them. But so we could put more manpower out in the field immediately to shut off power, and then after an obstruction is removed to restore power. And that's just one small idea within a report of many, many good ideas. But this is how government should respond to a crisis: thoughtfully, with substance, and with cooperation across the aisle and across all these different levels of government. And again, let me end with an appreciation of the role that Assemblywoman Amy Paulin is going to serve. It is her and her Assembly colleagues that will bring this report into the discussions of state government, will affect the Public Service Commission and the way they look at things, and then also to close with appreciation for Assemblyman David Buchwald and his seminal role in getting this off the ground. With that, since there are no questions from the press, we're going to thank everybody for participating. All we have to do now, my friends, is implement the plan. Have a wonderful day. We wish you a very happy new year. I'm George Latimer, County Executive, joined by my colleagues in government, wishing you a happy new year, and we go forward together. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you again a little bit later today to talk about COVID update. Thanks again. Bye-bye.